Hello, welcome to Mind Blowing Mondays by Breakthrough Awakening Kundan. And it's a show that I do every once in a while, and I release it on Mondays on topics that really blow your mind. Like, for example, a previous show was on the 54 senses. And today we have our guest, Mimi Burns, and she's going to talk about the different levels of bliss. And she commented on one of my Facebook posts about the 22 levels of bliss, and she was describing how she's experienced actually some of them. And Mimi Burns used to be a rock star on tour, a musician, and now she's transitioning to helping young people really do what they're passionate about and creating a new school where we're providing resources to them around their interests and what they want and the kind of world that they want to live. And it's an amazing project. Welcome, Mimi.
Yay! I couldn't thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm very joyful about this.
Yes. So yes, and it's all about when we talk about the 22 levels of bliss, we're coming from this space of we are already whole and free. And when we allow our feelings to be exactly the way they are, we naturally expand into these different levels of bliss. So it's very different from the ego uh, feeling not enough and trying to have more and more and more. It's the opposite. It's like we're not trying to get to 22 levels of bliss. We're just allowing our feelings to be exactly the way they are, and really appreciating our feelings and emotions for the messages they're giving us, whether it's telling us what we're thinking, that's not in alignment with our well-being, or it's telling us what we need, such as like if we need to drink more water, for example, like you just did, right? And really appreciating that and just really allowing our feelings to be the way they are, and by doing that, expanding our emotional range so that we really start really feeling more and feeling more free. Like I recently realized that the message of my life really can be stated in just 4 words. It's fuck happy, be free, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm there with you.
Yeah, so that freedom is more important. And even though we talk about levels, it's not like they're boxes. It's more like a continuum and a spectrum with many overlaps intertwining. And it's not like a ladder, it's more like a circle, like you mentioned earlier before we hit the recording button. And it's more like a waves in the ocean as well. That's another way to put it. In fact, one time I allowed the sadness that I was feeling to flow so fully that I started feeling ecstasy, really. And I was feeling sadness and ecstasy at the same time. It was such a trip. It was amazing.
I have had that experience with anger.
Yeah?
I got to feel, I think that somebody had mentioned to me once about feeling like, I was like, I'm feeling angry. They're like, well, of course, yes. But what else are you feeling? I'm like, well, but there's anger. There's this one thing I'm feeling. They're like, well, there's actually minute things that you may be feeling as well. Get in touch with your whole body. Is this part of your cheek feeling anger, or is that feeling softness? Are your senses taking in, or your sense of smell right now, is that taking in anger? I'm like, well, no, that smells like flowers. Okay, well, that's not anger. And so just starting to differentiate, that there's one small, tiny little portion fraction, it might be the chip on my shoulder kind of a thing, that there's this one thing that I thought was the totality of me. Mm-hmm. And it turned out to just be this one little piece, and that can get expanded and expanded and expanded. Mm-hmm. And that there can be fun around that. So my recent experience with anger, I was talking with my husband and I got to visit my anger space. And so I was like, I think of this in terms of depth. Like bliss is in terms of depth, right? Like you can have an anger bliss state of the fullness of your anger. How full can you get to in that space where you're like, like throwing a wobbly, And the wobbly is the adult temper tantrum. It's like an English term. My husband is English, so he loves talking about throwing a wobbly. So we're in this, like, the revisited loop, the one that, like, it's the conversation that, like, when you're first together in a relationship, it's the conversation that you slam the door, like, I'm not talking about this, I have to go out or whatever. And then you visit that conversation a year later, and maybe you can get like 10 minutes into the conversation because it's such a hot topic, so many triggers around it. And then the longer that you're in relationship with a person, you're either like, today would be a good day to approach that subject on a much different level, or today I really wanted to stick it to them, or whatever it is, however that shows up. So it was cute because the level of anger, I was looking at Stephen and I'm like, I'm so grateful that I was able to look at my anger today. And he's like, you're welcome. But there's this fuel behind it. There's this totality of it. And so I took that anger, and I used to, when I was first visiting those spaces, I didn't have a lot around there. It was just always projected at the other person. And so I love this embracing it, this, oh my gosh, anger, you're with me, oh my goodness, right? And so I went in front of the mirror, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror, and I'm like, like that, like doing total like ape type things, like making the most fantastic, dramatic faces that I can at myself. And I'm crying, and then I'm like, I'm so proud of you, because I was able to laugh and to cry and to yawn and to stretch and just own the fullness of that. And I was cracking up by the end of it. So getting back to your point, Kundan, of the wholeness of that space is really, really, like, I imagine being up on stage and being Shakespeare and just really the fullness of that one moment, because there's so many people that don't have that fullness, that they're not safe, they've never been safe enough, and so they just waver, they waver a little bit. And if they waver outside of that, it's the direction pointing towards another person of, you caused this. Mm-hmm. And then the next level is, oh, maybe I want more expression. Maybe I want more for me. Mm-hmm. And then eventually it's this, oh, I've got access to the continuum. And this is this wide range. So when I think of bliss, I don't necessarily think of, it's the of, oh my gosh, I have the wholeness of me accessible for myself, and I get to express that in like this, So that was my, when you talk about 22 states of bliss, I just imagine this deepening wisdom. And in that deepening wisdom, it's the more access that you have to all aspects, to peace, empowerment, joy, anger, sadness, fear, that circle, that the more that you have depth on the one end, the more access you have on the other end as well. Because then one of my examples was sitting underneath this waterfall. There's this gorgeous place just outside of Yosemite, and it's called Rainbow Falls. And if you're anywhere in that area, please go see that place. So it's got like this double waterfall, and I swam underneath it, and it consumed me. And there was nothing else in the world. It's just the torrential pouring down and being held underneath, like with the water just above me. And I was like, this is bliss, like the other end of complete peace and the totality of peacefulness. And then I got to experience that all consumption part. And I think that in the levels of bliss, it's how how much more consumption can you have around that? How much more embracing can you have around it? And, or me, how much more can I have around it? So that's what I have for that.
How much more can you feel, and increasing your capacity for feeling?
Right.
And I love your point about the wholeness is greater than any feeling you're feeling. And it was a similar experience when I was feeling sadness and ecstasy at the same time. I was feeling sadness, in fact, on the left side of my energy field, and ecstasy on the right side as an energy field rather than specifically in my body. At first, it was in my body, but once I felt it, I was able to actually move it to my belly and then move it out here. And then I realized that the wholeness that we're talking about here is actually beyond both the sadness and even the ecstasy, and yet inclusive of both. It was like sadness here, ecstasy here, and then I was whole, and I was the ocean, and that was amazing. And then I love your point about how when we feel any emotion, whatever it is, like in your case, it's anger, it's really felt on only one part of the body, and the other parts are feeling different things, but we get so focused on that one part that we get all consumed by it, when in reality, in the wholeness, so much more is happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not even just like the 7, 8, 12 senses. It's like there's way more happening.
Yeah.
And then, but once you expand and give, because so often in our society, because those emotions were oppressed or suppressed for such a long period of time, that now that emotional freedom techniques and all of those emotions they're like, finally! And so because of that, they're exaggerated and they want a much bigger stage. And so giving them a really big stage for like 4 minutes or something, instead of just squishing it in, and then it's like, oh, it's like gas, you're like, oh my gosh, that stinks. And so like giving them a full stage for 10 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is. And then that part of you can be like, oh, you mean I'm only one of 54 pieces?
Yeah.
I thought I was the everything, You're like, yeah, no, you're only one of like 54, but you got your 10 minutes. So there you go, for whatever period of time you have that. So it's nice to be able to create a space and give a stage and give a voice to every single little section, because, the more that we're able to do that, the more space and capacity we have in order to walk off the stage and let other people have a space on the stage and have safety around it, and just be like, I totally get it. You're good. You take the stage for 10 minutes and you have at it,
Yeah.
Just encouraging that.
Yeah, so that itself is a good technique or process to really move back into that wholeness that we're talking about, by giving them almost like they're one of the characters in a play, and like you're saying, just stand in front of a mirror and just act it out, let them play it out. And
look absolutely ridiculous to like the nth degree. And I don't think that people get really, or take the opportunity really, to just be vibrantly ridiculous. So often people are like, that's so ridiculous, and they're kind of like, oh my gosh, could I get away with that? And then you're like, you can totally be completely ridiculous, Yeah.
And that's a good point, because like I always say that the resistance to feeling bad or feeling any emotion, especially the painful ones, right? That adds another layer of suffering to it. And you're never wrong for feeling what you feel.
Right.
So the feeling that you're wrong, and then the resistance that comes from it makes it worse.
Right. I call that martyring.
Yeah.
It's right, like, I feel really bad about feeling really bad, and then you're like, okay, well, all right, way to go, way to feel really bad about that.
Yeah.
So I love this concept. You were saying it's the vulnerability. There's two key parts to me. One is the vulnerability to show up
Mm-hmm.
at level 13, at level 14, at level 15, you know, way into 22. It's vulnerability. The other part of that, because it's easy to say I'd like to be level 22 bliss, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of bliss, joy,
Yeah.
in terms of joy, happiness,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or just beyond happiness. But the gratitude on the other end of the spectrum from vulnerability is the gratitude to be able to move into sadness, anger, and fear
Mm-hmm.
with a gratefulness about the being, about
Yeah.
being, you know, like stepping in and just saying, I'm really grateful. I mean, although I expressed it with like, I'm really grateful that you were the person that I got to be really angry with today, you know, like, but the vulnerability in there of there's a tenderness
Mm-hmm.
to the human condition.
Yeah.
And the tenderness is that safety that
Mm-hmm.
people, you know, I want to feel safe enough to be fully human with other humans.
Mm-hmm.
And so the gratitude there of that tilting the end of the other spectrum of, I'm really grateful today that I got to express my anger in a really safe place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really grateful today that I got to express this deep, profound sadness for 3 minutes where I'm like wiping boogers from my face and I'm drooling, you know, like,
Yeah.
gosh, how often do people really get to be raw and vulnerable and really truly show up?
Yeah.
So, yes.
Yeah. That's a great point. And the vulnerability is one piece of it, and then the gratitude is the other piece. And right now, I want to address the gratitude because the gratitude comes from realizing the gifts of each of these negative emotions. And I've written like several different articles on some of them. Like I've wrote the article why anger is good for you and the 3 types of anger. And I wrote another article called the positive uses of negative emotions. So with anger, for example, the 3 gifts of anger is that, you know, there's one type of anger that is a temper tantrum that's telling you that you're being triggered by your childhood wounds and your programming, right? And your beliefs. And even that is good because it's telling you what needs to be healed, right?
Right. Set some new boundaries.
Right.
Right.
And speaking of boundaries, the second type of anger is the anger from the violation of boundaries, right?
Okay. Right.
Yeah. And then the third type of anger is what I call sacred rage, which is the flip side of sacred passion. And sacred activism is the righteous indignation from sin and injustice in the world.
Right.
Your own soul song or your deepest value, your heart virtue being violated.
Right.
And that's really important too, because if you suppress the rage, you suppress the passion too. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
All that fuel.
Right. All that fuel. Exactly. And fear, right? Fear comes in 3 forms, right? There is the fight, the freeze, and the flight, right? And if you look at them on a more useful reframe of that, the flight gives you mobility, right?
Right.
And the freeze gives you strength or stability, actually. And the fight gives you strength, right? And the fight gives you strength. And that's why you will see stories of, you know, mothers who are suddenly develop the strength to lift cars, burning cars away from their babies. You know, where did they find that strength? From that fuel, from the fear as the fuel, right?
Right.
Yeah. So it's all intertwined and it's an overlap really, and we've been taught as if they're like little boxes separate from each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then how to get into all of those separate rooms and then like have the whole house available.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like there's this do you watch much Christian Pankhurst?
No.
There's this, if you get a chance, check out some of his stuff. He also talks about having a house and one room that's completely off limits, and that's your shadows. And that you open up your house and you're like, you can go to every room except that one. But then once you open up that door and you have access to the whole house, because otherwise people are like, dude, there's like a room upstairs, nobody's talking about it, but I feel really uncomfortable. And so the minute that you open up those doors and that you create safe spaces to be able to express all of that, and then everybody can go everywhere in your house, you know, and you get to build more rooms, and you get to have more people over. And so it's I really love the idea of the totality.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Although I would be the first to admit that sometimes I don't have a lot of grace around the totality. Like sometimes it looks like messy. But I think that I actually have a concept that the more that, you know, the gift that you have of addressing these ideas and the people that you have on your shows, I think the more that this just becomes a part of the consciousness, and the more that we see people living and have access to 14s, that the easier it becomes to feel safe, to peek into the 15 and access the 22 more often. That it's just this, you know, like right now, if you see me walking around in a prom dress at the grocery store, which I do, you know, I like to wear dresses out there like, oh, you know, there's just a little bit out there. But if everybody starts doing it, if everybody's like, you know, and then the happiness and the whatever, and then they calm down, and then they're like, okay, thank you, that was just, I had a moment. And so what a fun world, you know, it's just this, so
yeah, totally. And it really comes from this space of being a yes to whatever's arising, while simultaneously being aware that there is so much more. And in fact, that's why I recently started a cool meditation project with different volunteers, where we do a one-on-one Skype like this or Zoom, and we just stay still, and there's really nothing special. Like, we just, no special technique. We do move our bodies in the beginning to really get into our bodies, and then we drop down into our bellies, and we just stay quiet with each other. And every once in a while, I would ask the volunteer, what's arising in you right now? And they would express whatever's arising. And whatever's arising, I would simply say to them, yes, and you are so much more.
Right.
And sometimes I would express whatever's arising in me as well, so that I stay a clear channel and I can hold the space. And then I would say, yes, and I am so much more. And just from doing that, I've had two pretty insightful experiences. One happened actually just yesterday morning, where I was sitting and I noticed this urge to cry, to start having tears. And when I would say yes to that, while at the same time being aware that there is so much more, suddenly I noticed my energy field shift from my eyes down into my chest, and then my hands and my arms. And suddenly the urge to cry actually became the urge to laugh. And I was like, whoa. And they're both forms of release. And except laughter is a more expensive release and it's more fun. And it occurred to me that, you know, maybe one of the reasons why we cry or we feel sad is because the resistance to our feeling is so intense that our bodies can only release through these two holes now. That's
like pushing it out.
Yeah.
Like this tiny little, I get it out. Right.
Literally a release of pressure.
Right, and the chemicals that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. I also love that, you know, I love the silence meditation where instead of the, you know, instead of that, like for people who are ragers, who just like, for that to be like, take it internally, and then that breath, And then the exhale, instead of allowing the poisons, so internal through your nose, hold your breath for the 3 seconds to enact the vagus nerves, because that helps with the chemicals to stop being released into the brain. Mm-hmm. And then slowly exhale, and exhale, the idea of exhaling the toxins then.
Yeah.
And not allowing it to grab a hold of different parts of your body internally. Mm-hmm. So just the opposite spectrum. Like some people are at that stage where they're like, where they're constantly in this state of, woo! And then other people are constantly in this, I'm just going to internalize it, and then I'm going to die at 36 years old because I internalized everything. Or get on medication or whatever.
Right. That's how you have autoimmune diseases and things like that.
Right.
The body literally starts to fight itself. Yeah.
Exactly. And so just the opposite of, I'm not even going to internalize this. I'm just going to recognize it, pull it up, and then let it exhale through my body. And I'm so grateful that I was able to just recognize it, Yeah. And like the little, like, oh yeah, I can feel my jaw and this little thing every time, like the people that get like, are really triggered about driving, and then they're like, oh, no, I'm happy, and you're like, yeah, you're not really happy. That's not really happiness.
Yeah.
Right. Like, let's just give you a little more access.
Positive affirmations or positive thinking where you're forcing yourself to be happy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm happy. Like, that's one way to get happiness, I guess. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Chemical happiness instead of like actual in the body, depth happiness, because you're recognizing, oh, I got some issues. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm so grateful for this show. Thank you, Kundan, and thank you for having me on as a guest today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being part of this. Yeah.
This is a great project.
It is. Yeah. I know, right? Yeah.
Thank you for all of your messages also that you post on Facebook, and I love reading those. Often I'll go through, I just have a few minutes every day that I go through, and you're like on my top people that I make sure that I read what you're saying. And so I really appreciate that. Yeah,
you're welcome.
Yeah.
So, on my Facebook page, you commented about your different experiences with the levels of bliss. The waterfall was one of them, and with others with your baby being born, and also with the schools of fish. So before we go, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yes. The day that I found out I was pregnant, I was on tour in Italy, and we had a bunch of big shows lined up, and it was during one of the world summits. So all of the world leaders were there. The day that we arrived, all of the, so like we're getting off, we just arrived in Italy, where we have a show that night. And it's in Milan. And so we had been like the tour manager and the guy booking the shows, the booking agent, had booked all up and down throughout Italy. And we were really excited because this was our second or third year going back there. So we go out and we're pulling into the club, and all of a sudden I look up on the TV screen, and there are tanks rolling into the city. And I was like, that's weird. Why are there tanks rolling into the city? And they were being bombed. So we were like 20, not 20, we were probably 25 minutes away from the main city that night, from the area of Milan. But because of the G8 summit, it was like one of the worst G8 or one of the worst summits, the world summits that they had in terms of like terrorist attack stuff, or I don't like to call it terrorist attack. It's just people sticking up for themselves, and however that works for those people. So it was they started cordoning off the city, and I was like, I had a lot of fear because I had never been in a place where they were closing down a city, cordoning it off, and putting it under martial law. And so I was in a foreign country. And so I was like, wow, this doesn't seem like a good idea. So our next, so we played a few more shows, but the things continued to deteriorate. And I really came to this place. My band, like the places, because we were Americans, the places that were hosting us were getting bomb threats because it was during, I won't talk about which president it was, but one of the presidents that nobody liked over there. And so, so our sponsors pulled out. So I was eating like, at one point I was eating moldy bread and moldy vegetables because that's what I could afford. And we didn't have a ticket back until the end of the tour. So like I had fear going, I had a lot of anger going, and I had a great amount of sadness going. I didn't know that I was pregnant yet. So we're playing these shows. People are still showing up. They're like, we love you, stay, you know? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so strange, you know, to have like so many people show up that really loved us. And then at the other end, all the fear factor stuff showing up at the exact same moment in life. So I wasn't getting my moon cycle, and I knew that there had to be something going on. So I was with this friend of mine. She's like, maybe you're pregnant? I don't know. Like that. And I'm like, oh, maybe. And so I go and I take the test, and they have Burger King over there. So I'm like so I pee on the little stick, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, but it was like this internal, oh my gosh. And so I went out and I'm like, you know, like to the guitar player, to my husband, I'm like, look at this. And it was a moment of, wow, my life is about to take a major change, take a major new direction. And I went outside and I looked up at the mountains because we had a show that night. I looked up at the mountains, and it was the first time I was able to see the sun. I'd never really been, you know, like you get blinded and you're like, oh my God, you know, like there's that. Well, I looked and it was gorgeous. It was just like you could see kind of red and white rolling through it, you know, like just like I could see the sun. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I just felt so at peace, even though there were, even though like the tanks were around, even though all of that craziness was happening, I hit like a 13 because my fear was equal at a 13 on the other end of the scale. And I was so entrenched in that moment of 13, looking at the sunshine, that I'd been around 29 years in my life and never seen that before. And it was the totality of that moment of looking at the sun. And astoundingly, you know, the son was my first child. It was a boy. And so to look at that and see that first day and know that was this brightness that was coming into my life for the first time. And then later on, that day we went down to the Mediterranean, and I love it there because they have naked people, and I'm all about naked people. Well, naked people on beaches specifically. Well, wherever you gotta be naked. But anyway, it was awesome. So there's like naked people, and I find one little alcove way off on the side, and I swam out. I'm like, all right, I know that you're within me now. I know that you have come here in order to be your own self, and I just want to really enjoy this moment with you. So I'm 29, so I go out, and the water is this astounding Mediterranean green blue, and like multiple levels of it, and you know, like I want to drink it, and it's just, so I go and I swim out as far as I can, and there's a coral reef, and no, it wasn't a coral reef. Well, I thought it was rocks, but it was a coral reef. So unfortunately I stood up on top of it and I dove in, and I just sank and sank and sank, and I kept on getting deeper. And then I thought I could breathe underwater. It was just this mystical moment. And it reminded me of, you know, how babies, when they're in the womb, can breathe the liquid of the womb. And so all of these fish then just surrounded me, and it was all of these colors like in the swirl. And I was like, I didn't even remember that I was human and that I needed to get air. And
Mm.
I just stayed down there, and I was so at peace. And so it was like reaching. So even though all of that chaos was happening around me, all of that, the show's falling apart, $10,000 that our booking agent owed us, um, and the balance of that, then, like possibly the most fear that I've ever, well, some of the biggest fear that I've ever had in my life around business. And then the other end of that, of being submerged in the fullness of what the earth is all about, right? Is this new life and this being submerged in the water and this depth and no oxygen or just enough oxygen. And so then at some point, my brain was like, you got to breathe. So I was like, I don't have to breathe, really. We can just stay here. And then I was like, no, I think it's a good idea. Breathing's probably a good idea right now. And I came back up to the surface, and and that was the moment that I knew that everything was just going to be okay. That no matter what happens in life, that I was going to be okay. Because I always get to that point in life where I'm like, everything is just okay. Whatever. If you're at a 14 in fear, if you're at a 14 in the heavens, wherever you are, and even beyond, because I'm able to hear and see beyond, even in the beyond space, you're still okay. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like so often I had forgotten that. And that I get these experiences. I consider it human experiences, but it feels kind of mystical at the time because it transcends something, like it transcends oxygen, for example. Mm-hmm. So when I was down there, I still can feel the water on me when I think about it. And I still feel the sunshine when I'm like, oh my gosh, So there's just this gorgeous humanistic, and it reminds me of how to stay connected through life, even in all of that, even during that, and how to really get entrenched in peace.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's my story.
That's amazing, especially with the second one. It was as if the earth, you had the pregnancy, and then suddenly you had your own rebirth, kind of, where you were surrounded by the earth's own amniotic fluid.
Right.
And then you rose above it. And it was such an ordinary human experience, at the same time so extraordinary and mystical, because you were, in total acceptance of both extremes, the fear and the bliss, like whatever was going through.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, so that's my and that's one of those experiences. I have quite a few of those, like just in general in life. I notice the depth of gratitude that I have and the peacefulness around it is equal to how much I'm experiencing that completeness, that wholeness that I feel when I'm in that moment. So, like when I was down there, I'm like, this is so amazing. But it wasn't that expression. It was, I was laying in the water peacefully, and just that, oh my gosh, was just embodying that. Not like I'm like frenzy in the water. I was just embodying, this is so amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like the story about noticing the sunshine too, because like I had a similar experience in this co-meditation as well that I did last week. Last week I woke up to the trees being cut next door, and it was so noisy. And then I had this meditation, scheduled with somebody at 10 in the morning, and the trees were still being cut, and I was still hearing the noise. And at first I was feeling a little bit annoyed and bothered that, I was feeling like I can't meditate with all this noise. I need the peace and quiet, I need my ideal environment and my ideal time for this. But I decided to stay in the room and stay with her and go through this process. And the beauty of this process is it's transforming me as much as it's transforming the other person, right? So it's like decided to be a yes, the noise, and from that yes and through that yes, moving into the I am so much more space. I started noticing first that I was actually getting quiet despite the noise. And then I started noticing, oh, there are actually other sounds like the clock ticking, the
Right.
birds chirping and tweeting, and
Right.
my own breath and my own heartbeat. And I was like, oh, whoa, like there's this entire range of sounds and experiences and wholeness happening that I
Right.
didn't even notice. And there was such a release and a feeling of like utter like freedom and joy and appreciation and in fact gratitude in that. And I was like, wow, like this is amazing. Yeah.
I actually just realized I have to leave to pick up my children.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
like right now. I love you. It's so wonderful chatting with
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much for having me.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. So thank you so much for this call, and you have a wonderful day.
Yes, thank you, Kunan. I will catch up with you on Facebook.
Yes.
Okay,
Awesome.
bye, beautiful.
Bye.